Our first article will be presented by David and Rishad, both from Sauder Business School in the University of British Columbia. Together with Kate White, this team used an array of research in psychology to develop a framework to guide companies, policymakers, and nonprofits to shift consumer behavior to be more sustainable. Thank you for joining us, David and Rishad.
Hello, everyone. This is Dave Hardisty, and we're talking about how to shift consumers to be more sustainable. And why are we focusing on that right now? Well, there's a bit of a paradox where, on the one hand, this is a great time to be sustainable and launch sustainable brands for companies. There's more and more interest and growth, especially among younger generations. There was a recent Nielsen report showing that products with sustainability claims show twice the growth of their traditional counterparts, right? So this is a market segment that's getting bigger and being successful. But at the same time, there's a long ways to go, and there's this kind of gap between what people say they want and what they actually do. So if you poll people, the majority of people, 65%, want to buy purpose-driven brands that care about sustainability. People say that they're willing to pay more, they'll pay a premium for environmental products and other sustainability products. Yet when you measure actual choice of who's actually paying more for sustainability, only about 26% actually do, right? So you have this intention-action gap where people want to be sustainable, and it's a growing trend, but there's still a long ways to go. So what can we as marketers do to help shift people so that their actions align with what their intentions are, help people to do the right thing and make the world a better place, right? So there's a number of challenges here as to why this hasn't happened already and why we can't just rely on traditional marketing techniques. What makes sustainability different and more challenging in some ways? There's several key factors. The first is that there's often a trade-off between yourself and what's good for the world, right? You might have to pay a little bit more for a sustainable product or maybe spend a little bit of extra effort, right? And the benefits come to others rather than you. So there's also a long time horizon rather than, most products, you buy it and you get the benefit right away, right? And sustainability, the benefits may not be seen for a long time by definition, and that's difficult because people don't care as much about the future, unfortunately. And the third key challenge is collective action. So many times sustainability requires everybody working together to do the right thing. And if only one person changes their behavior, it may not have a big impact, right? If only one person's fighting climate change by themselves, they can't solve it. And so that can be difficult to overcome. Another factor is abstractness, right? So it's hard to imagine what are CO2 emissions. I can't see them. I'm not sure exactly what that is. And so because it's so abstract, it's not so compelling to people. And the last key challenge is overcoming automatic processes. So people, unfortunately, we've not been very sustainable up till now, so people are used to doing unsustainable things. And so to change their behavior, we have to overcome their automatic impulses to just do what's easy for themselves and change their behavior, and so that requires some extra effort until we can get those new sustainable actions in place. So we reviewed the literature in top journals in marketing. So this was over 320 academic articles at the best marketing journal, Journal of Marketing, as well as some lesser marketing journals. And reviewing all these papers, we identified 5 key factors to shift consumers to be sustainable. And there's a handy acronym. So the 5 factors are social influence, habit formation, individual self, feelings and cognitions, and tangibility. And we'll go through each of these in turn. We'll start with social influence, and I'll hand it off to Rishad.
Hi, I am Rishad, and today I'm going to go through each of these factors and highlight 2 examples that we think are really interesting and relevant, and that can bring these factors to life for you, hopefully. So the first factor, as Dave mentioned, of our SHIFT framework is social influence. Now, decades of research shows that people are strongly impacted by the presence, behaviors, and expectations of others. This makes social factors one of the most powerful tools affecting sustainable consumer behavior change. We examine how 3 different aspects of social influence, namely social norms, what is socially appropriate and approved of by others, social desirability, wanting to make a positive impression on others, and social group membership, which is based on what group we think we belong to, can shift consumers to be more sustainable. Firstly, social norms. Communicating social norms, that is, what others are doing, what is socially appropriate, what is approved of in a given context, can be highly influential. People adjust their behavior to follow the norm. A recent large-scale field study showed that ambassadors who themselves installed solar panels were able to recruit 62.8% more residents to install solar panels themselves. This means social norms are especially effective if those who are promoting them, those who are advocating them, are also involved in the sustainable behavior themselves. The next component is social identity. Social identity relates to the groups that we belong to or are in groups. This can be based on the country we're from, the university we went to, the company we work for, or even the sports teams we support. In general, people are more influenced by their in-group members. So, if people in our group, a group that we feel we belong to, that is important to us, act in a particular way, we want to act like that too. However, for sustainable behaviors, sometimes promoting what other groups are doing can be effective. In one fascinating study, researchers found if an outgroup is performing well on a positive, sustainable behavior, such as composting or recycling, people from a different group may copy their behavior in order to show that they are better than them. Healthy competition between groups can thus be an effective way to encourage sustainable consumption. The second critical factor is habits. Behaviors that persist because they've become relatively automatic over time as a result of regularly encountered contextual cues. So many sustainable behaviors are habitual, such as how to travel, what to buy, and where to throw it away. And as Dave mentioned, we've developed a lot of unsustainable habits. Habits, though, can be notoriously hard to change because they are so automatic. And so often, it's important to first break bad habits through interventions that break repetition, such as discontinuity or penalties when behavior can be monitored, and then help people form new positive habits by making sustainable behavior easy, by making it the default, for instance, providing prompts before decision-making, using gifts or larger monetary incentives, and providing real-time, regular comparative feedback. So I'm first going to discuss discontinuity. This means major life changes, such as moving to a new place, getting a new job, or starting school. These have been shown to change the context in which consumers operate, making them less likely to act automatically and habitually, and more likely to think about their actions, align it with their values, and be able to change habits. For instance, one study with over 800 households found that those who had recently moved reduced their car use from 67% to only 34% after receiving information on sustainable transportation, while those who hadn't moved recently did not really reduce their use of cars. So once we've broken bad habits, we might also want to form new good habits. One important tool for this is feedback. Giving feedback on customers' energy use, car use, etc., can be an effective way to inform them about their behavior and let them make changes. So for instance, giving feedback on energy use while driving can be especially effective if it is given over a long period of time and in real time, because that allows consumers to adjust their behavior over the course of their use of the product. Next, Dave will discuss the other three factors.
Great, thanks. So individual self, we're appealing to individual differences, for example. That's where some people naturally care more about the environment than others, and of course you'll be more effective if you target them with your interventions. The second fact is self-efficacy. People want to see that their actions really make a difference, right? Like sometimes you're not sure if I buy this product or if I take this action, will it actually make the world a better place? You want to show them how it will. The third way to target the individual self is simple self-interest, right? If they get benefits for themselves, people are more likely to do it, pretty obvious. The fourth big factor that I want to highlight is self-consistency. So people like to be consistent over time and like to be consistent between their values and their actions. And so if you can get over the hump and get them to do one first big effortful environmental action, then they're likely to follow through and do more environmental actions in the future. And especially if you highlight to them, hey, this is just like what you were doing before. And this is also important for firms to be consistent, right? People want authentic companies that practice what they preach. And so an example of this is in hotels, right? Hotels want guests to save energy. They will ask you, obviously, to reuse your towels. They'll ask you to turn off the lights when you leave the room. And how do consumers respond to this? So when hotel guests are asked to save energy, and it's by a firm that's making visible environmental efforts, such as using reusable or compostable stuff rather than plastic disposable things to consumers, when the company is making visible efforts, then these are effective appeals, and people reduce their energy usage by 12% in hotels. However, when the firm asked people, hey, please save energy, and the hotel wasn't doing anything special, nothing visible at least to the guests, then people didn't take it seriously. They don't like that. And if anything, the guests actually increased their energy usage a little bit. You got a mild backfire effect. So it's important for the company to be consistent over time. And the last part of individual self is self-concept, right? We choose brands and products and services that match who we think we are. And one interesting example, it's a little unfortunate, is that often sustainability has been more linked to feminine values rather than masculine values. And sometimes kind of nurturing nature and conservation is sometimes seen as not manly. So this can be fixed, though, by kind of reframing it to show how actually environmentalism can be quite masculine if you think of it in terms of the wild wilderness, ruggedness, toughness, and protection, right? These are all traditionally masculine values, and this can close a gender gap where often, typically, you have more interest from women in sustainability and sustainable products, whereas if you reframe it in this more rough and masculine protecting way, then men are interested as well, and you can close the gender gap. The next factor, feelings and cognitions, it might seem a bit funny that we've combined feelings and cognitions together into one thing. That's because we have two different ways of deciding, right, with your head or with your heart, and it's important to consider and appeal to both sides of that. And so, of course, you can offer positive emotions to people, that it'll be fun and you'll feel good doing sustainable stuff. That's effective. Negative emotions can also be effective, but need to be used carefully. And I want to highlight here, like guilt appeals, right? So if you subtly remind people about guilt and ethical standards, such as in group settings, people tend to be more aware of standards of right and wrong, and being environmental is a standard, that will increase ethical product choice from 50% to 70% in one case. But if you do explicit guilt appeal, so you really, rub it in their face with a lot of upsetting imagery and kind of trying to chide people to do the right thing, sometimes that can backfire actually, because people don't like it, they'll disengage from it, and they may be actually less likely to engage with that brand or product and less likely to choose sustainable products. So you've got to be careful with the negative emotions. They can be helpful, but got to be used sparingly. The next thing is information, of course, informing people about what is more sustainable. Sometimes people just don't know, but it's important that you frame that information well. So, for example, with energy, this was a study that I worked on where people don't really care about future energy savings, right? When they're buying a light bulb, most of the time people would only pay more for a more energy efficient light bulb 12% of the time. These were shoppers in a store. And however, if you reframe that energy savings to 10-year energy cost in dollars, then people can see, oh man, if I buy this cheap light bulb, it's actually going to cost me $200 over 10 years. People do care about the future dollar cost, and these dollar cost labels increase the choice from 12% to 48% of the people choosing the more energy efficient light bulb. And the last factor here is labeling, simply just having good labels. This is also an example of that, prompting people so that they know, oh, okay, this one is the more environmental option, making that super obvious. The last factor we want to go over is tangibility, right? So you want to make things concrete, understandable, vivid, right in front of you. And so one way to do that is to communicate the local and proximal impact. Okay, how is climate change going to affect my community, right? And that will be more impactful than seeing how it affects the whole planet. The second way to do this is matching temporal focus. Mostly people just care about what's right now and in front of them, and environmental impacts are in the future often, and that's just a fact, right? So you either have to bring immediate impacts to them, or you can move people into the future. One way to do that is to ask consumers to consider their legacy, right? They ask them, how will I be remembered? How will my children remember me and my actions? And that brings them into the future, which matches when the impacts happen. And so through this legacy framing, people donated 45% more to a climate change charity. The third part of tangibility is to encourage the desire for intangibles, getting people interested in experiences rather than material objects, which also makes people happier, by the way, so it's a real win for consumers. And a fourth aspect is through concrete communications. So often with sustainability, you get a lot of statistics. Maybe you hear about glacier retreat, for example. And if people see a graph of glacier retreat over time, that's very abstract. And in general, it may be motivating to scientists, but it's not very motivating to consumers. So you need to give people really concrete imagery, such as here's the glacier retreat, where you can see over 1 year how far this glacier has gone back, and it really will make an impression on people, and they're more likely then to choose sustainable options and be swayed by those concrete stories, specific examples, rather than overall statistics.
It's really important to remember that there is no one-size-fits-all solution, and which of these factors, which method is appropriate will depend on your context, target market, brand identity, and other details. So we've come up with some steps to use the framework. Firstly, you should take the time to clarify the context. Clearly identify the target segment and the details of what you want to achieve and the drivers of this particular target segment. Once that is done and you have a clear understanding of your goals and your market and the context in which it's operating and what you want to achieve, only then do you go to select and apply the tools that seem the most appropriate to your situation. We then suggest that you first test your strategy on a smaller segment and implement the ideas and strategies that are the most effective. Finally, remember to analyze and evaluate the outcomes to learn more about what works and what doesn't, because then you can use that in other contexts and for other products as well. We are excited that so many companies from different sectors are embracing sustainability, and this is a trend that we hope continues. That's why we want to make it easier and more effective to promote sustainability to customers. And I really hope that this was helpful. And now that you know more about the power of social influence, habit, individual self, feelings and cognition, and tangibility, go out and use these to shift consumers to sustainable ways of buying products and using products. And feel free to ask us any questions that you have, because we'd be very excited to answer them during this Q&A session. Thank you.
Well, thank you for a great presentation. We now have some time for questions from the participants. If you want to ask a question, you can type your question in the Q&A tab, not the studio chat tab, on the left side of your screen. as a first question, I'd be curious to hear more about the first factor of social influence. What is an example of the effect of social desirability on sustainable behavior?
Rishad, do you want to take that one?
Sure. So social desirability is all about the impression we want to make on others. And people usually want to make a positive impression on other people. So for instance, we want to show others that we are high in status and that we have wealth. So in some cases, sustainable products can be used to convey social status to others. So people in public places may be more sustainable than they are in private, and they may buy sustainable products in order to convey to others that they are good people or even that they are high in status.
Great. Another audience question is, can you explain more about the effects of self-efficacy on sustainable behavior?
Sure, I will chime in on that one. So this is pretty important where you don't want to think that what you're doing is just a drop in the bucket and not making any difference, right? And so one way to do that is to show what the combined impact is with other people. You say, hey, everybody working together has this impact. But that can be a bit tricky. You can even just show yourself over time, right? Like if that was in the energy example of where saving energy over 1 year, okay, that's all right. But if you show the impact over 10 years, it's 10 times as big, right? So you can almost show people a bigger impact by scaling it up over time or across people. And the other way would be through specific examples where you can show them, hey, here's where you supported this product, which supported this local community and maybe led to less waste there, and then you could show that community, right? Give them a success story from before to show, hey, you know what, this really does make a difference what you're doing.
Great. Just got another question in from the audience. Is there an opportunity for governments to use this framework to encourage sustainable behavior across the economy?
I guess I'll jump in on this. Yes, for sure. So it's very applicable in government as well. You can use this in government. There's some government-run companies, right? Like even schools, police departments, fire departments, sometimes some insurance may be government-run, and they can use all of these types of things to encourage people to make more sustainable choices. And in fact, many of the studies that we talked about today, some of them were run from business, but many were done in government as well. So like stories from people or the prompts, right? You know, getting people to sort their stuff carefully. This is a big pet issue of mine, is that there's been such a push to get people to recycle that now you get a lot of what's called aspirational recycling, where you kind of hope it's recyclable, and so you put it in the recycling bin even if you're not sure. And it turns out that almost all the time when people do that, it's actually a mistake and it leads to contamination, right? So now you put the greasy pizza box, if you put that in the paper recycling, it actually ruins it, right? And so it's important to help people to sort correctly and not to do all this aspirational recycling, right? And so you need prompts, for example, if you have examples on the recycling bin and it shows you clearly exactly what's recyclable as well as what is not recyclable, like don't put pizza boxes in here, those timely prompts can be used by government to help people to make more sustainable choices. So yeah, super applicable to government as well.
And if I could just add, like lots of governments. Okay, sorry.
Go ahead.
No, I just wanted to say that lots of governments are actually doing this. They are involved in encouraging sustainable behavior or pro-social behavior, and there's groups in the U.S., in the U.K., in Canada as well, which are part of the government, but their specific role is to try to use behavioral insights to shift consumer behavior.
Great. One last question. Could you explain more about the role of positive emotions on your framework?
Yeah, so that's in the kind of feelings and cognition section, and in general, people like to do what feels good, and that this is kind of a classic marketing concept that also just works really well with sustainability. So, you want to make sustainability fun, and that you go. It's kind of like you want to join the party, right? That it's not just about being serious, right? And so, if you can in your ads make it, you should have smiling people, and you should have. It looks like it'll be enjoyable to do this, and get along with other people, and all of those, and then that you can have pride too, right? That after you do this, you're going to feel great about yourself, and people respond to that, right? They want to join the party and feel good, and it works on a very deep level, right? Again, where in a case where maybe facts and statistics won't, but choosing sustainable stuff because it feels good, that's always going to work well.
Well, thank you very much, David and Rishad, for an excellent presentation and webinar.